to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Pierce Love, and like we said in the intro, welcome to Simpler. We're so excited to have you guys be a part of it. May it be through your ears or through watching. We're so excited to have you guys be a part of it. Really want to encourage you as well. As you're listening, jot down some questions, jot down some thoughts, whatever, because we love to hear from you guys, and we love to hopefully down the line be able to have some episodes that probably address some thoughts, some questions, and things like that. So as you're listening, compile those things. If you're like, man, what Pierce said right there is so dumb and stupid, I'm going to get him. Do it.
Yeah,
do it. Message me on Facebook. Let's do it, and we'll talk about it. We'll chat. So anyway, Ryan, how you doing?
I'm well, man.
Good.
And you?
Good. I'm good, man. I'm enjoying the slightly cooler weather here in West Texas. It's really nice sitting outside at nighttime. It's not like I'm still sweating a ton.
Yes. I'm still enjoying the picture. I'm still enjoying the picture that Steven sent us of you, Micah, yesterday from high school.
Man.
Your senior year in high school.
1999.
Dude.
That was insane.
I did look kind of anorexic. I'll give you that, Steven. It's because I would play outside mid, and that's all we did was run. I think on average I would run 12 miles a game was what we figured out.
And you're still doing that, right? 12 miles in the morning,
Absolutely.
12 miles in the evening.
Every time I dream.
That's right. So, Micah, how you doing?
I'm okay. Today I played at a disc golf tournament, maybe potentially the worst round of my entire life. So I'm a little sad, but it's okay.
I'm so sad too. And I know you're the type of guy that holds on to those emotions for a long time. So do you need all the listeners to kind of pour out their love? You want to poke them poke you on Facebook?
Yeah, actually, if you guys will just
Can we take it way back, like where you could throw a sheep at somebody on
there
Facebook?
You go, yeah.
That's it, yeah. There you go.
Oh man. So at the time we're recording this, oh goodness, there you go. First one. Let me scoot back.
Get it out of the way.
Yeah, get it out of the way. So at the time we're recording this, the president was just diagnosed with COVID-19. I didn't even do my little intro. I haven't thought of an alliteration. Profound ponderings. I think we're good with sticking with that one.
Sure.
Pierce's profound ponderings. And as I was thinking about this today, it's not so much a cultural commentary as much as it is just something that I'm thinking about of how our society is responding to something. So like I said, Donald Trump was diagnosed with COVID-19 a few days ago, a couple days after the debate, something like that, and sent off to the hospital within 24 hours or so. And the response on social media has been really interesting, to say the least. Now, I know that I don't have eyes everywhere. I don't have ears everywhere. But what I'm seeing is that more so because of this event, the people on the right are saying what the people on the left are doing, and the people on the left are saying what the right are doing. And I'm not seeing any of these observations at all. So I feel like what people are doing is people on the right are saying, look at all these people on the left wishing for Donald Trump to die. And there's people on the left saying, oh yeah, screw you, you right people, you guys, now you got finally get a taste of your own medicine. And now you're flip-flopping back and forth. But I'm not necessarily seeing the flip-flopping. I'm not necessarily seeing a ton of death threats. There are death threats. Not death threats, death wishes. No, I'm not. I haven't witnessed a death threat on the president of the United States. Yes. Just to be
Service
clear.
knocks on the door before the podcast is finished. NSA is listening right now through all of our devices.
Exactly. Just to be clear, I haven't seen any death threats, but I have seen one or two death wishes, but it hasn't been like the predominant thing. And it's more so been followed up by something like, it's just somebody who's trying to be that annoying left person, like that annoying liberal. They're trying to stimulate the conversation. They're trying to get people to lash out and have the mean comments. So anyway, it's I don't really have a ton of conclusive thoughts, as much as more so it just seems like people are utilizing a very sad circumstance to be diagnosed with what is, well, I know they're shifting around, but it was the pandemic and now it's just a global virus. And so it's kind of going back and forth with the title. Either way, it sucks that somebody has it. And I think that it's not fun for anybody. And so as much as we've talked about this a little bit before, but during this season of the presidential race, people are going to be lashing these things back and forth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And
It's all political.
like we've mentioned for the past few weeks, there's so many inconsistencies already in the way people are. And so what they're doing is they're utilizing someone's sickness, somebody's issues to further their agenda, but it doesn't necessarily attach to every single stance that they've been having. So now they're just shoving this in the front line, shoving this in the spotlight, and trying to use it as a weapon when it doesn't seem that there's a lot of people on the other side actually responding in that extreme way. And same thing with the other side. So I'm not trying to take sides by either means. I'm just seeing people on the right do one thing and people on the left do one thing, and they're accusing either side of doing some things. May it be wanting somebody to die, or may it be flip-flopping back and forth on their stance on the coronavirus. And I'm not seeing that at all. And I think what this is this is showing that there's something really innate within us when it comes to death, and when it comes to like children or animals. There's something within us that we begin to like analyze and paint a picture of innocence towards that, if that makes any sense at all. So like when someone dies, all of a sudden they're a great person. Me and you, Ryan, haven't had the best dads. But whenever they passed away, right? Whenever they passed away, there's a lot of people that wanted to paint a golden stroke across their memory.
Sure.
And that's so silly to me. It's weird to not be honest in the midst of that. So same thing with something going on here with the sickness is people are wanting to either utilize it to paint black over Donald Trump or to paint gold over Donald Trump instead of just being honest about the situation and moving forward within that, instead of actually looking at what it is. And so what I was saying about children a second ago too is that a lot of people have this perfect picture of innocence when it comes to children until they start disobeying, until they start doing one thing, and then it begins to affect them personally. And I think what we need to do is stop allowing death, sickness, and innocence or age, stop allowing that to define your stance either way.
Yeah.
And I really want to push you guys to that in every circumstance, think through it. Like just because something new is introduced to the mix, think through it a little bit. That's kind of what I mean, I'm not super political by any means, but whenever this was introduced, I was like, oh man, that means this. Oh, that means this. Oh, and he was on the same stage as Biden, and Biden's pretty old. And like,
they're both old.
They're both old, yeah.
So I think Biden's older.
So
than
I was
77,
thinking of all of these things, and if that moment I felt I needed to make a Facebook status for every single thought that I was having without connecting them all, it would be a mess. And so, just a huge encouragement to you guys, especially as believers in the midst of a presidential race, put Jesus first. We say it at the end of every episode. Let Jesus be core. And so, if don't allow this political race, obviously speak your voice, do all that type of stuff, but don't allow that to be defining of who you are. Let Jesus be the defining nature of who you are. Let your identity rest in that. And then whenever you have these thousands of thoughts, just like I had whenever I read the headline that Trump was diagnosed with or tested positive for coronavirus, pray about it. Think about it. Don't let your first response be Facebook. Don't let your first response be Twitter. Pray about it. Think about it. Talk about it with your community, and strive to have a consistent stance in the midst of that. I don't have some super dope transition.
I'd like to comment real quick.
Do it, yeah.
I think for everybody, a question you need to be asking, and I'm saying this as like boldly as I can, a question you need to be asking as a follower of Jesus right now, and as an American follower of Jesus, is: are you more passionate and zealous about politics than Jesus? And if the answer to that is yes, I think that you need to reconsider what God has left you here to do. I have thoughts on politics. You have thoughts on politics. But at the end of the day, the only king that never changes is our God. And if you're more passionate about something that does not have to do ultimately with God, then stop, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, and that's exactly the sermon series we're in right now at our church, right?
Yeah.
That God the King, that God is King, and that matters more than anything else.
So
Awesome.
I think let's actually think about that. So like just to stress to you guys, it's easy to be, I was going to be like, let's have a moment of silence and think about it. But I didn't want to make it all cheesy and weird. But legitimately really think about it, because what people want to do is they'll hear a question like that and they'll just lash back and be like, that's not me. But yet even then they were showing they had more passion against being pushed than they actually did for.
Like, I'll give you a real emotional
Jesus.
example. Like, I was watching the debate last week just because I was curious about some funny things that Biden might say, which would have been, great. So, I mean, it wasn't a phenomenal debate in regards to debate goes, but like when you watch the debate, here's a question for you. If you watch the debate or when you watch clips of the debate, do you find yourself more riled up over what happened at the debate than you do when people are proclaiming a false gospel? Like, does that make you more upset than someone like the Mormons or Jehovah's Witness, for example, proclaiming something untrue? Or are we so, are we so used to those things that we now are more bothered by someone who disagrees with us on politics? That's what I think about too, is like what you were expressing earlier, is that we're so willing to divide over politics. And we have to remember, we talked about this, or did we do one on? Yeah, we did one on unity. Like, that
back in
we're unified as the body of Christ worldwide.
Yes.
By the Spirit through faith in Jesus, and that's people who are in political systems like Russia, or Venezuela, or so. So like our politics can't be the thing that unites us, and they cannot be the thing that divides us.
Absolutely.
Yes. Which
Sorry, rant.
no, dude, for real. I could go on. Part of me is like, let's just talk about this for an hour. Let's do it. But I think that actually does translate a lot to what we're talking about today. The allowing our hope and our strength and our identity and everything to come from Christ. We are in essence resting in that. We are pushing ourselves aside and we are wholly trusting God for who he's made us to be, for who he has proclaimed us to be as his people, as a family united under him. So Ryan, why don't you talk about that, or why don't you introduce our topic a little bit more clearly, so I can stop rambling about it.
Well, yeah, we want to talk about finding rest in God's provision, or rest in what God has done. This idea, and we've kind of danced around this, or maybe not even danced around it over the last several months of this podcast, but we've all come to the place where we really enjoy and delight in the fact that we can rest in God's work. And so you're going to hear us not just tonight or today, whenever you're listening to this, but you're going to hear us for as long as we do this podcast, talk about putting our confidence in who God is, in his work and his provision, and resting in that, and being able to be free from this dutiful obligation we kind of have to perform for God. Like, and I say perform for God as opposed to like be empowered by God. Like of course, we at this table believe that God has empowered us for holy living and godly lives. But I think that still for me, I'll give you an example. I have really struggled since the boys have gone back to school and kind of the new schedule. I've really struggled with my regular Bible study time and my Bible reading. And I know for those of you who are listening, some of you are going, man, I don't ever read the Bible. And Micah would be a really great encouragement to you in that, because Micah listens to it. And so whether you're listening to it on the commute, when I say, I'm Ryan, when I say reading the Bible, I mean however you're taking it in. Yeah. So I'm a reader, I'm a visual learner. I have pictures in my head of it, and that helps me a lot. But I've really struggled over the last month of kind of finding my footing in that. And I think as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, I would have felt really condemned, and I would have really felt like maybe God doesn't like me as much anymore.
Yeah.
And, like maybe my relationship with God is not as strong as it was, and not as whole. And now I'm at the place where I'm like, no, my relationship is what it is because of who God is. Like, rest in God's provision, in this case, Christ, rest in salvation.
But Ryan, isn't Christianity at least a little bit about our works and our behavior?
Well, actually, Christianity is ultimately about who God is, right? And what he has done.
It's bogus.
Bill and Ted's bogus. Was that the second one?
I forget.
I never saw the second one.
There was there's like the Bogus Journey or whatever. And
I think you're mixing Pee Wee Herman and
No. There was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and then Bill and Ted's Bogus. That was the second one, I think.
The Bogus Journey?
Something like that. I never saw the second one.
Sorry.
Anybody see the third one? Has it come out?
I haven't yet. No, it's on demand, and it came to some select theaters, but I haven't seen it yet.
I did watch Land Before Time 10. Does that count?
Oh my goodness! I can't believe how
good the first one was. Though I haven't seen it in years, but I loved it when I was a kid.
Well, we're way off topic now. There was this whole thing. Remember Littlefoot, the Brontosaurus character? His mother dies, right? And so there was a meme that came out not very long ago when they decided that the Brontosaurus doesn't actually exist at all. And so there's a meme where Littlefoot begins to disappear too. So it's like he's not even there.
He's never existed.
Christianity, you asked the question, is it about our works? Is it about our behavior?
Yeah.
And the answer simply is no, that Christianity really is, right? About who God is and what God has done for us through Christ. We are not strong enough, capable enough to add anything to the equation. We just can't. I think for us to believe that our works somehow enhance our Christianity either elevates us to too high a place that we shouldn't occupy, or devalues something of Christ. Like it must make Christ a little bit powerless, that somehow he relies now upon Ryan and how many times I've read the Bible this year, that kind of thing. Like that's ridiculous, right? And so the best spot, the absolute best spot for us to be as believers is just to rest in God's provision, rest in what he has done. And we really, man, like we want to encourage you to do that. Like we want to encourage you to quit beating yourself up, to quit letting I don't know, maybe the old Baptist preacher you grew up under like me 45 years ago or whatever, like quit letting these other voices that say you have to do this and that and the other to be pleasing to God. Don't let those be the weighing factors in your life anymore. In fact, I remember, man, I was like 22 years old. I was a waiter at Chili's, and it was really popular at that time amongst a lot of the college students we had a huge college group, 450 students there in Lubbock at our church. And it was really popular among our group to not work on Sundays because it was the Sabbath, completely missing the point of the Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
And I remember a movement like 20 years ago where people would, like pastors would say to families in churches, like, you do not need to go out to eat on Sunday afternoons, because if you do, you're enabling the waiters and wait staff to break the Sabbath. You're helping them break the Sabbath. And I think that one of the things that I still don't know
like
that
nobody told them it's on Saturday,
right? Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown.
Didn't those guys go to seminary?
Probably, but no one cares.
What's that?
Wow.
Seminary. Cemetery.
Yeah.
But there's this verse in Mark where the disciples are essentially breaking the Sabbath and the Pharisees are ripping them for it. And then Jesus just says, like, the Sabbath, or man isn't made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for the man. Like, God has created a rest, and we want to speak about it more broadly than just the Sabbath, but I think that's a great starting place.
For sure.
There is a rest that God has created for us to enter into. So like in the Old Testament understanding of Sabbath was you take a day off a week from your work. And then not only that, but every 7 years, you wouldn't farm your land or do anything to your land for an entire year. And then not only that, but every 50th year, it was the same. So if you think about it, on year 49, that's a Sabbath rest. And then year 50 is a Sabbath rest. So the people of God were forbidden for 2 years from planting anything or harvesting anything. And the whole purpose for that was so that they would learn to rest in God and what he had provided and how he had sustained them so that their affection would be for him. And I think, obviously, I feel this way, I guess, now, but when pastors today say you need to take Sunday off, first of all, those of you listening, nowhere in the New Testament ever is Sunday called the Sabbath. It's never changed to that. Second, when we make it about taking a day off, like I've literally heard people say, don't do the dishes, don't do any yard work. You know, we fixed, I guess that was Saturday last week, so we were okay. Well, not technically.
It was the Sabbath.
We fixed a pipe, out of the church. And so
wow.
But people make it about that instead of saying the Sabbath really is about leaning hard into what God has done and resting in him and trusting him for holiness and trusting him for provision and trusting him for life.
What are some, can you give us an example in Old Testament texts?
Yeah. So first of all, I think one of the key things, and this is an easy one for me to remember, but Exodus 31:13, and it's easy to remember because the verse and the chapter mirrors each other, but 31:13, God says, I gave
palindrome.
Is that what it is? A numerical palindrome?
3113.
Yeah, there you
Same backwards, the same forwards.
Yeah, nice. Can that be in numbers as well?
Pierce's vocabulary word for the day.
A new segment, Pierce's vocabulary.
I saw Land Before Time 10.
Yeah.
Hey, did you know that this, anyway, Littlefoot. And then Sarah, was a triceratops. Some people still didn't ever catch that.
That did you know that we had a Sarah that came to our church that was spelled that way? I think on purpose. Our parents were because of Land Before Time.
Yeah, that's
just really interesting to me.
Interesting. That is interesting. That was a big influence.
I was like, wow, what an interesting fact. Palindrome.
Exodus 31:13, though, a palindrome numerically. God says that he says, I've given you the Sabbath so that you may know that I am the God who makes you holy. And God is wanting to take not only responsibility, he's provided for our holiness, he's provided for sanctification and life and salvation, but he's wanting credit for it, reasonably so, right? God is wanting credit for it. And I think one of my favorite examples of kind of works-based righteousness contrasted with Sabbath rest is the manna. So the people in Exodus 16, they are just a couple of months out of slavery, and they're in the wilderness and they're hungry, and God provides for them manna. And if it's all in Exodus 16, you can read it right there. But In Exodus 16, it tells us that the manna would melt in the heat of the day, so they'd have to gather early in the morning. But then also if they stored up too much, so like the mindset being some people are thinking, what if it's not here tomorrow? So they hoard a whole bunch. Well, the next day, the manna would be rotten or spoiled or faded. The exception being the Sabbath. So on the day before the Sabbath, they could gather twice as much and it wouldn't be spoiled. And again, it was God saying, look, this is my provision. So everything that the people did, all the work that they labored for every single day wouldn't last until tomorrow. Meaning what? You got to get up and you got to go out and do it again. And I think that that's a really beautiful analogy of our salvation as well. That like, if your mindset towards salvation is, I got to get up today and try my hardest and do my best so that God can be happy with me. Like all the work you do today is back to zero tomorrow. If that's your mindset, you know?
Yeah.
There's not a ledger that carries over.
Yeah.
But then one of the coolest things in that, and then we got to quit, or y'all got to say something because otherwise I'll just keep going because I love this talk. But one of the coolest things in Exodus 33 is that God directs Moses, and then Moses tells Aaron to take some manna and put it in a jar. And we see later from the text that jar is put in the Ark of the Covenant. And it's a jar of manna that's assigned to the people for all generations, a jar of manna that will never spoil or fade away, and it's kept in the presence of God. Fast forward all the way to John 6, where Jesus, refers to himself as the manna, the bread that came down out of heaven.
Yeah.
And then into Revelation 2, where those who overcome by faith, who enter into the presence of God, get to partake of the hidden manna, Christ. So there's hidden isn't like hidden away secret. It's hidden there. The word means kept. The kept manna, the enduring manna. And so I think it's really interesting that what the people labor for, even the stuff that they labored for the day before the Sabbath, still spoils on the third day. Like, and none of it remains. But what God does remains. What God does lasts.
Yeah.
And I think that, man, that's just, there's a lot of hope in that.
Absolutely.
I think there's the contrast that sometimes we miss in that narrative and that story, is that it's us trying to, I'm going to put us in that category. It's us as people trying to find provision for ourselves on our own, apart from God, versus relying on God and simply resting in Him. And I don't know what it is that's innate in us that wants to be able to say, I did it, or wants to feel like we accomplished it. Like I feel that a lot for me too.
Sure.
And I think there's a sense where we don't like other people to, come alongside us and help us, because then sometimes we're afraid we say or someone will say, you didn't actually do it. So-and-so helped you do it. And I think the contrast in that text is something that we still struggle with today. There's even those of us who've put faith in Christ, which is what this message of rest is. Ultimately
that's what we're really
saying, stop trying to provide salvation for yourself, but just rest in God's provision of salvation. But I think there's another nuance of that in those of us who've put faith in Jesus, that we have a tendency to try to do it on our own and not rely on God. And it's such an interesting thing, the idea of the manna being done at the end of the day, because it's not, I don't think the focus was so much on the gathering, like the people gathering. The gathering was just part of what was necessary for them to get what they needed, but it was the fact that God was providing for what they needed for this entire time they're walking in the wilderness because of, this situation. So I think there's an essence too where us three talk about this all the time. Like we love the idea of investing. We love the idea of being smart with our money and wise, but ultimately, our trust is in God's provision, even for monetary needs, and not in ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that with to touch a little bit on what you said as well, it's so interesting to me that there are plenty of people that absolutely they tend to have a bend on they're scared for their salvation. I think it's the best way to put it. Like to maintain this salvation, I have to continue working. I have to continue doing these things. I have to do this. And then there's the people that I actually see more of nowadays that seem to fully rely on God for salvation, for the say the prayer moment or the come down to the altar moment at church camp or during a church service. But then for everything else, no, I got it. I'm good. Now I've got to prove to Jesus that I was worth saving. Something like that. So it's like they're still trusting Jesus for salvation. They're not trying to save themselves. You know what? That was too hard for me to do. I couldn't do all those things.
Yeah.
But now I can maintain godliness on my own power. I don't need anything else. And you addressed it at the very beginning of this acknowledgement of our empowerment.
Yeah.
So we are, I don't know if you're going to touch on this one or what we talk about later, but that we are empowered to do godly things now. We are empowered to live a godly life now.
Yeah,
we
for
are
sure.
empowered to walk as Jesus now. The Spirit is poured out upon us. And what people tend to do, though, is say, okay, I'm saved from my sins. Now I can just keep on being me. Now I can just keep on doing this. And that goes against everything that you had said in regards to kind of this pushing ourselves aside entirely. And we've said that a whole bunch on this podcast of it's not about Pierce. It's not about Micah. It's not about Ryan. It's not about you listening. It's not about you watching. It's about Jesus. It's about what Jesus has accomplished. It's about what Jesus has done. And when we really, what's funny is most of the times that Paul or someone in the New Testament is really talking about the gospel in such a way where they're presenting an argument or they're presenting a discussion, the starting point is you couldn't do it at the beginning. What in the world makes you think you can do it now, buddy? Listen, or he points back to the beginning. He says, remember the beginning? You remember when you died with Jesus? Why do you keep returning to this dead nonsense, dude? Like
those of you who started by grace, find you return to the law.
So, like, why are you keep running back to this? Why are you? I love the way there was a band, Tooth and Nail band. I could be switching some stuff up, but there's a band called Run Kid Run. And they talk about this first verse of this song is just this freedom from chains and like this rejoicing in salvation. And the second verse of this song is how hard they fought to return to their chains and how hard they fought to get back there so they could be back in like this home. And I'd written a song about that a while back as well, of just like we have this tendency to try to cling to either something that's familiar or something that we know, but it's still so far away from what God has intended for who we are to be. And that's not, and in an instance, in both those circumstances of these individual experiences, these are people doing what they can to fight back to go towards something that's useless. And so in the midst of all these things, two things are futile and there's no rest at all in it, if that makes any sense. So like you're pushing yourself away from something, you're fighting your way back to something that it makes no sense at all. And so there's no rest, and ultimately ends in no rest. Instead of just embracing what Jesus has done. And again, what you had said, Micah, it's so strange that that's like our go-to. And I don't know if that's a Western thing. I don't know if that's strictly an American thing, but it's our go-to that we say, we got it.
Yes.
We're good.
I don't think it's just an American thing because it's in the narrative of the Old Testament.
True. It's very true.
Israel. So I think that's obviously something innate somehow in us as people.
I like talking about rest and like just being able to kind of lean into God and let Him do the work. I love kind of just if we were to look at some of the battle plans of the Old Testament. So Hezekiah is being assaulted. The city of Jerusalem is being assaulted by Assyria, and God is very plain about the king of Assyria that He didn't allow that to happen. And Hezekiah literally takes the letter. They get a threatening letter from the people of Assyria. Like, that's so funny to me. Like, the people of Assyria send the people of Jerusalem a threatening letter. Here's what we're going to do to you. I'll meet you outside, by the bike rack after school. You know what I mean? Like, and literally Hezekiah goes up into this upper room in his house, his palace, whatever, and he lays out the letter and basically says to God, hey, did you see what they said to us? Like, what are you going to do about this? And God declares that they won't even let an arrow fly there. Like the Assyrian army won't even be able to let an arrow fly there. And God sends an angel, it seems like from the text, that kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, like in one fell swoop, right? There's another place where the people are panicked because they're going to battle, and God starts dropping 100-pound hailstones on the enemies, and more people were killed by the hailstones than by the sword. There's another place where Jehoshaphat says, God, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And God says, send the choir out in front of the army. And the preacher joke is, man, they must have been bad singers. But like, as they're singing, out in front of the army and they come up over the hill, all of the enemies are dead. And even
That's wild.
I know, it's so crazy. In another place in 2 Kings, the king of Edom, the king of Jerusalem, and the king of Israel have all been brought together, presumably to be ambushed by the kings of the Moabites. And they inquire of Elisha, and they said, what should we do? And they're dying of thirst. Their armies have traveled a long way. They don't have any water. And Elisha says, dig some holes in the ground. And even though you won't see any rain, water will flow across the ground and fill up the pits. And so the next morning, what happens is the Moabite army is coming to surround the camp of the Edomites and the Israelites and Israelites and the people of Judah. And they see this early morning sun shining off the water, and they think it's blood because it's shining red. And so they think, oh, the three kings down there destroyed each other. And the attacking army all puts their swords away and just walks into the middle of this ambush, and they all get slaughtered, And it's just like, you see all these things, and I'm just like, man, like I think it's funny that we, like you had already touched on, Pierce, that like we think that God is big enough for our salvation, but we don't think he's big enough for today.
Yeah.
It's wild, man.
It's
it's
like
crazy.
just rest. Just like
Right?
find your comfort in God. Find your peace in God. I promise you that if you're listening to this today, at some point, either right now or in the past recently or in the near future, at some point, there is going to be something about yourself, and you're going to hear this little voice in your head that's just like, man, God must be mad at me today.
Mhm.
God's probably disappointed in me today. I feel like I'm far away from God today. You're going to have all these kinds of thoughts, and you're probably going to find a Christian blog or podcast or something that goes, yeah, here's the things you need to do. And what we would tell you on this Christian podcast is that like rest in the work of God, that what he has declared, who he has declared you to be, you are. And the obligatory, reference to Romans 8:1, that there really is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
And you are still loved, and you are still adored, and you are still pleasing to him.
For too long, and it probably is still the case today, preachers like us, and not us, but preachers like us, have spent too much time on Sunday mornings preaching, if you want to be a good Christian, do this and do this.
Oh,
and
I
do
definitely
this.
did that in my early years of preaching.
It's the norm. And I mean, I think there's some value in that to some degree, but what it does, and you probably have felt this before if you're listening, is that it makes you feel like, well, if I haven't done these things, if I can't accomplish all these things, then I suck.
Mhm.
And I'm not good enough. And so what that causes is the sense of I've got to be better. I've got to do better.
Absolutely.
I was riding with a guy to a disc golf tournament. He rode with me this weekend, which is always a really cool ministry time. But he apparently is a very young believer, got saved a while back, but just hasn't been in an environment. He moved to San Angelo a few years ago, hasn't been in church. And so we got to hang out some and talk, and he would cuss and then be like, oh, I'm sorry, man. And so in his mind, like that somehow is a gauge of how God views him,
Mhm.
rather than him understanding that his new life in Christ now, as he begins to understand the reality and the beauty of that, will drive him to think about what he says and the intention and purpose. And so, but that's what it is we've spent so long preaching, do this, do this, do this, instead of starting with just rest in God.
Yeah.
Rest.
Exactly. Yeah, there's something to be said. I think we addressed it either on the Happy Christian or on the Joy episode. That boy, did I just lose my thought process.
I saw the Land Before Time 10.
You saw Land Before Time 10. You know, brontosaurus aren't a thing anymore, right? Where we tend to. Oh, that's what I was saying. Okay, cool. So I addressed it back then as well, but I'll address it again. That I feel like the majority of these circumstances, what people do is there are cultural things, so cuss words, hateful speech, those types of things. Those are very cultural. And a lot of people say, well, if you wouldn't say it in front of your grandma, or actually, would you say that to Jesus? And so like, they'll throw things like that on there. But I think that
kind of like how my aunts all thought crap was a cuss word.
Your aunt thought that crap was a cuss word?
Yeah, all my aunts did.
Well, now I got to
You know what
mark
I
this
said?
episode as explicit. Way
You
to
know
go.
what I said that's crap.
That's crap, dude.
Didn't you get in trouble at a camp for that once, for using that in a sermon?
Actually, I was preaching at a preteen camp, and I got in trouble for saying stupid.
Oh, okay.
And I said, that's stupid.
No, way to go. Crap and stupid. Now we're super
I
explicit.
told him before the
Oh,
camp, I was
man.
like, listen, this was like one of the first like kids camps I'd ever preached at. And I was like, look, I don't do these things. At this time, my kids were real young, so I wasn't acclimated to the culture. And I was like, you just got to know this isn't my wheelhouse.
I want you to know that those of you listening, you're still pleasing to God, but Micah is not, because he used
Did you hear those words?
he used the S word. Stupid.
and suck.
Oh my
what?
goodness.
Just
Wow.
pile it on. So anyway, there are other cultural things like language, there are other cultural things like rated R movies and those types of things.
Like the Passion of the Christ.
Yeah, exactly. So
You can't go see rated R movie.
you can't go see. So there's like blanket rules anyway.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is golly,
Noticed?
you like that? What I've noticed, my dear sirs, is like the heavier topics. It seems like sex, alcohol, drugs, these types of things. What tends to happen is an individual will have something happen to them. May it be the fact that they slept around in high school. May it be the fact even they were raped. Like, may it be the fact of one side or the other that that culture may deem as culturally pleasurable, or something that's terrible that's happened to you. They're allowing that to paint the picture for a certain action. So therefore, the rule becomes you cannot have sex because of this. You cannot approach relationships because of what happened to me. And the standard is all based off of an individual's experiences instead of based off of who God is. And what's great about it is, in your circumstance, what you're talking about with riding with that guy, that's a very cultural thing. Christians don't cuss. It's a very cultural idea, or you can probably even just more of a blanket statement. just say religious people don't cuss. And
Yeah.
so whatever if you're a good person, you don't cuss. And but then you
I
have
noticed you said
I
that.
just noticed that I said cuss. Well, crap.
You
So,
suck at this.
I know, right?
Quit being so stupid.
Quit being so stupid. Oh, but anyway, so may it be cultural or experience based, God speaks into both those things and provides rest in both those circumstances. And whether it be something that we're allowing either for me, the lens of Pierce to go onto it, or the lens of West Texas culture to go into it, both of those God can easily take away and correct that in such a way that they may seem like opposing standpoints, but he can correct that in such a way where it brings it into him. And there is rest in that because man, I feel like these people want to die so badly on these hills. The fact, like what we brought up earlier with politics, that people want to die so badly on what has happened to them, want to die so badly on what their grandparents may have taught them what that Christianity is. And I'm not talking about talking bad about your Mima and Papa, but their theology probably wasn't great. And whenever we die on that hill, instead of committing ourselves to Christ, we're putting so much more weight and work and everything else upon ourselves, whenever God invited us to rest in him.
Mm-hmm.
And if we truly lean upon his grace, lean upon his word, lean upon his wisdom, then when we approach these circumstances, these situations, we're not so bogged down with whether or not I can prove myself to be good in this, whether or not I can correct my language fast enough before Micah judges me, whether or not I can teach my kids how evil sex is before they become wherever they mature enough to start having it. Rather, I rest in God and I lean upon his wisdom and I proclaim that to my friends. I proclaim that in car rides at disc golf. I proclaim that in my home, and people don't see in the midst of that, our goal isn't that that God would see Pierce. Golly, for you listening and watching, I apologize.
You needed a nap today. You admitted you needed a nap.
I did, so I apologize.
Like this morning at 8:00, you were already talking about needing a nap, and here it is.
Exactly.
It's that infant.
It's 12 hours later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did you get a nap today?
I got a very tiny one. My daughter would go. She was playing with the book, and then every time she'd drop it, she'd go, huh? I'd reach over and give it to her and just fall back asleep. So about every 6 minutes.
His daughter's like less than 6 months old, so don't.
My daughter just turned 18, and it's wild.
She really gets frustrated when she drops the book.
But our hope is that in the midst of that, because everything started with Pierce couldn't do it, Ryan couldn't do it, Micah couldn't do it, we couldn't gain salvation on our own. Since everything started with that, we pushed ourselves aside and we died with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And now fast forward to where we are now, at whatever X amount of years since salvation, if we're going based off time, I know that we don't, but now we're looking at years later. Whenever we approach our families, we're still saying it's not about Pierce, it's about Christ.
Yeah.
Whenever we approach our with pastoring, whenever we approach disc golf, whenever I approach design work, whenever I approach all these different things, it's still with Christ in mind. And what people want to do is say that's more work, but there's so much more freedom.
Well, yeah, I think we probably something that a lot of us don't think about is when, like my buddy riding with me that apologized for cussing, if I was to somehow convey to him that his language dictates how God views him in terms of eternity or life or righteousness, what I'm doing is proclaiming the antithesis of rest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so what we can do, what we have the ability to do, is proclaim the message of the gospel by proclaiming the rest that we can have in Christ.
Yeah.
And it's this sense of like, and it sounds like super simple and cheesy, but not bringing judgment on people outside the body. Like Paul even says that in one of the Corinthians, I think, like, don't judge people, like judge people in in the body, but not outside the body. Like, let's not think that somehow by us proclaiming our self-proclaimed cultural morals that the world's going to get saved. What the world needs to hear is that the only way they will ever find rest is in God through faith in Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And we have a chance to proclaim that by, for a lot of you, this might be really hard to do, but by not being bothered by things that have bothered you for so long in culture.
Well, I mean, if we're going to be sticklers, right, and start saying, well, you can't talk that way, then what we really have to do, anytime a legal precedent is kind of set or a law-based perspective is set, then you also have to say, well, were you impatient today? You can't talk like that. Were you easily angered? As a distinction from being angry, there is an anger that doesn't sin, but easily angered. I think that what we do typically is we set up a standard that's acceptable to us, that's in line with the works I'm already doing.
Yeah.
And we look at you and we say, "Oh man, you're doing it differently than I would do it. Therefore, it's wrong."
Exactly.
Instead of kind of the unity, Micah, you were talking about at the very beginning, instead of saying to the person who speaks a way that maybe isn't the way we speak, uses words we don't use, and instead of judging them based off that, we're looking at the fact that that person also is resting in Christ. Or if they haven't rested in Christ, our aim for them is that they would find salvation, that they would come to a place where they're
what do we want
resting.
people to like be moral and go to hell? Is that our goal?
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Yeah, there's this invitation.
That's some crap right there.
I think we talked about it in last month's podcast, but the Matthew 11 text that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
Yeah.
Like,
that's the message Jesus is proclaiming.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, I will tell you guys that this week, I just told Michelle yesterday or the day before, I was just like, I'm not happy right now.
Hey, we have this episode on being a happy Christian.
Oh, nice.
You should check it out.
Nice, thanks. But I just said, I don't feel like I'm getting everything done that I want to get done. And so kind of like the idea of the manna, like I'm an artist. That's my primary source of income. And if I don't paint, then I don't have anything to sell. If I don't have anything to sell, then I can't buy groceries. Like Micah, like you said, like ultimately our confidence is in God, but this is still my job and this is the work that I do. And so trying to figure out how to do that, trying to figure out how to study like I want to study. I have some challenging studies I'm trying to do as well. Serving with you guys, doing podcasts and Pierce, you do all of our videos every week for the church. And in addition to that, trying to be a husband and a dad and make sure that I'm present with my kids and enjoying my wife. And like, I told Michelle, I was like, so we have a fence. We've been in our house now for 50 weeks and the fence is still not done. And the baseboards still aren't up in the bathroom. And it's easy to kind of look at those sorts of things, or if you will allow the example, to look at the baseboards of our spiritual life, whatever, whatever stupid analogy.
Gosh, I got to make a shirt like that now.
Are the baseboards of your spiritual life finished?
Have you put up the baseboards of your heart?
Yeah, there you go. Please do it. Let's do that. The first simpler T-shirt, is the fence finished? But here's the thing: like, as we were preparing for this, and as I was kind of making some notes over this over the last few days, I had to take this as a reminder to myself. Instead of being frustrated or angry with myself or whatever, I had to take this as a reminder that like God still delights in me because of Christ, and that there isn't. It's not failure if I can't get to all the things on the list. Eventually, they'll get done, but like my duty, my work, if you will, is to rest in God. In fact, to put it a different way, in John 6, when the Pharisees and the crowds following Jesus, they say, "What good work must we do?" He said, "Believe." And like, just, that's it. Like, rest in that. Find your confidence in that.
Point out something you said a second ago, and this is not what you meant, but you said, "I know that we are supposed to rest in God, but this is still my work." Like, you didn't really mean the "but" there. What you mean? What you mean is, because I think that's.
Butts.
But the reason I'm pointing that out is I think that's how we tend to think.
Yeah,
we tend to think like, I'm going to rest in God, but I still have to do those other things. And those are not in contrast to each other. Like us, you working as an artist is not in contrast to you by
Resting in
nature,
God.
resting in God. It can
good
be. But I think that like that's what we tend to look at is well, I want to rest in God, but I've got all these things going on. How do I marry the two together?
That's a good point.
Because they seem like they're in contrast, but they're really not. Like, I think it's a perspective and heart issue where we say, no matter what happens at work, God's going to provide. No matter what happens in culture, in the election, no matter what happens in the economy, God's still king and he's still going to provide. Those are not in contrast to each other. It's not a but. It's I'm going to do the best I can as an artist. I'm going to do the best I can as whatever it is I do for a living. I'm not so sure sometimes, as a graphic artist and as a father. And like, we're going to do all those things to the best of our ability, but not because somehow we're trying to say, God, I've got it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
We're still resting in God.
And there's a huge encouragement to you guys as well, is that in the midst of exactly what you said, there's no issue with goals at all. The fact that you listed off like 5 or 6 different things, it's tempting to say, well, I don't want to add too much to my plate because that's just more works for me to do. The issue here is that people are allowing their success or failure of those goals to define who they are.
Yep.
Yeah, good point.
Instead of saying
Yep.
who they are in Jesus. And so when you approach when you actually get the fence done, when you're pumping out art like crazy at the numbers where you really want to be, because I think last month was a good month for you.
Yeah,
Or,
I created quite a bit last month.
Exactly. So I mean, you're going to be at a place, but
RT Douglas Fine Art.
exactly, yeah.
Go buy some.
They can't spell Douglas.
So go to Add Simpler Pod. You're tagged in all those
Tag
posts.
links.
There you go.
Everybody listen.
Buy it all.
RT Douglas.
We got
Fine art.
We were Danglish a couple of times today.
Okay.
Danglish.
The Danglish is over there. But either way, you would never say, and I'm not putting this necessarily on Ryan, but
No, go put it on me.
The truth is, on months where you don't produce as much,
Yeah.
and at months where you produce exactly where you want to be, the truth remains of who you are in Jesus.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And which is so much. I love that you brought up John 6 earlier, and there's just I forget exactly how you phrased it, but there are certain wordings there that I just hadn't really thought of exactly of how. The daily thing. Even though I knew the daily gathering, it's super dope to see it as like every 24 hours you're reminded of God, because I love, before manna even came, God said, okay, in my morning you're going to see the glory. You're
Yeah.
going to see my glory.
Yeah.
And then what's great is that every morning after that, for 40 years,
Yeah.
they were reminded of that.
Yep.
And it was God providing. So I love the daily aspect of it. And then Christ connecting himself to that. And he's saying, they ate the manna in the wilderness and they still died. They saw God's glory every single morning and they still died.
Yeah.
You partake
This
of
is
me,
this is
you live forever.
this
Yeah.
is Hebrews.
Yeah.
Just like he's reminding these people he's writing to, whoever wrote Hebrews, don't harden your hearts like they did in the wilderness.
Exactly.
The call to rest in
Yes.
God, to take a Sabbath rest in
Exactly.
God still exists.
Exactly.
Still exists.
And
So
not a day off.
not
Yeah.
a day off.
it's not a
I
day
mean,
off.
take a day off if you want
Yeah.
to take a day off.
I mean,
but yeah,
can I
that's not
just say, like, I think it is a great idea to take a day off the week,
Absolutely.
but not because of
but not because of the
rest.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So because of who Christ has made us to be, we strive for it in such a way where we live to give him glory. We live to give him honor. And what that looks like a lot of times is we're striving to be excellent in what we're doing. But whether we succeed or fail doesn't change the
Mhm.
initial starting point of who Christ has made us to be.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
so-
Well, it's not only the starting, right? It's the finish as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So
That's good.
exactly. So have goals, have ambitions, think for yourself, but allow all of those things to be laid upon a foundation of who Christ has made you to be.
Yeah.
Because of that will bleed into the baseboards of the heart. That will bleed into
That's gotta be
the
a thing
fence.
now.
That'll bleed into the walls. Because if the foundation is truly based, I mean, to use Christ's analogy a lot of the times, if the foundation is truly based on him, then whatever we build upon that, with Christ in mind, at Christ at the core, it's going to be so stable because it's built in a way to glorify
Yeah.
and honor him. And that doesn't have to be, once you go check out RT Douglas Fine Art on Instagram and all that fun stuff, you're going to see that Ryan's not painting crosses every single day.
Never.
You're not, so
Yeah.
people might look at him and be like, he's a Christian artist, but like you in all things you do, you strive to glorify and honor God. And in
Yeah.
the midst of that, you're painting what you want to paint. And even though somebody else may define honoring God a certain way, we know that the way God defines it is a heart bent on him,
Well,
a new creation.
I think that, something that you've had conversations, with even recently, we've talked about is some of the content you create. There are some people who think that is not okay based on
Sure.
the cultural standard. I'll put it on me. There are some people who hear about the environments I'm in the disc golf world periodically that,
Yeah.
it's not a bad place, but like there's some places where there's some illegal stuff being done,
Wow.
taken. There's no drug testing at disc golf yet. And I'm around that. And, people might look on that in a negative light as someone who's a pastor, but the reality is like my goal in disc golf is not to be in a moral environment. My goal in disc golf
Absolutely.
is to be excellent at what I do, to give me an opportunity to be a proclaimer of Jesus. And just to let all you guys know, God has finally answered a long time prayer for God to give me a bigger voice in the disc golf world. I am
It's awesome.
now officially partnering with an organization called Eagles Wings Disc Golf, which does disc golf ministry, disc golf missions, and they also do some ministry on the Disc Golf Pro Tour. I will be functioning kind of as over the chapel ministry, kind of like a chaplain for the Disc Golf Pro Tour, starting really now, but launching in 2021. So like all that work, if you will,
Yeah.
of me playing disc golf and being involved in disc golf, was always for the purpose of God getting the glory. It wasn't ever about me. I mean, I
Right.
played one of the worst rounds of my entire life today, and I could
You
go to
suck.
bed tonight thinking I suck,
That's
which
so
is actually
stupid.
true. Or I could go, I'm going to do better next time, and really, it doesn't change who I am.
Yeah.
My circumstances can't dictate whether or not I'm resting in God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Pierce, you mentioned earlier, I mean, I'm just throwing this softball at you.
Do
You know,
it.
you ready? You mentioned earlier just really quickly about, whether I have a poor month in creating artistic content or whether I have a
Mhm.
great month like I did last month in creating artistic content, that my rest is in God or that my identity is found in God.
Mhm.
And so what would you say to people who find it easier to rest in God or put their confidence in God on the lean months instead of the flush months
Mm.
where they have
I see what you're
everything?
saying. What would I say to them?
Yeah.
I would probably just end up asking a lot of questions about where they are in life, of just like why would they say that it's that way? And then most of the time, through the conversation, they would expose that they're still resting upon their own provision.
Exactly,
They're
yeah.
still resting upon their own provision. And so I'm hoping in those circumstances, and that's one thing that I've tried. I know all three of us have tried to stress a lot on this podcast, is whenever we are putting Christ as core, those conversations, because with money and salvation and a lot of those types of conversations, they usually start on a bed of nails. They don't start in a comfortable place. And if I were to have that conversation where someone would say, or I'd have to confront somebody who isn't truly trusting in God in the lean months, or excuse me, they're leaning upon God in the lean months, but then whenever they feel like they're succeeding well, they're kind of, that's what God's going on the back burner. And I'm having that conversation. My prayer and my hope is that Christians will be able to begin conversations with other Christians, knowing it's starting at a place of love. And so, but the bleak part of our culture is that most of the time people would come to that conversation and be like, "How dare you tell me when I'm trusting God
Yeah.
and when I'm not trusting God?" And at that point, it's just really easy to expose their actions. It's really easy to say, "Well, hey, it's obvious that you're leaning upon your own works within this," and even then, it's what we talked about last month as well. It's a heart shift, because it doesn't change whether or not the month was full. However, I forget what the words we just used.
Yeah.
Whether,
Flush.
yeah, fledged out. Whether or not you made as much as you wanted to make that month, or whether or not you didn't. The situations are still the same.
Yeah.
It's the heart behind it. And it's the heart of how you respond. And so if in this month, it does seem like in those months you are pushed, and it seems like you are thrown to your knees because you're like, I can't do this. And so what I would say is, when you're on your knees then and you have enough next month, remember that God is the one that provided then,
Yep.
and he's the one that's providing now.
Yeah.
And I would say back as well, well, you remember the episode of Simpler you listened to? Well, go listen to that, and then we'll have this conversation. And then I'll say, remember the manna. It's every day.
Yeah.
It's
Every
every
day.
day. We're remembering God's provision. We're remembering God's grace. And in the midst of that, we can throw our hands behind our back, which I need to show you. I need to take a good picture. Riley started sleeping like that, where she's like,
Nice.
just full relaxation mode, where we can actually throw our hands behind our head and go, thank God it's not up to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And truly rest in that. And there's so much rest in that. And so to close us out today, we've shared a lot of stories biblically. We've shared a lot of stories on our own, from experience bases as well, but they are all still pointing back to the truth of who Christ is and what Christ has accomplished. And as we, as believers, as people who follow after Jesus, allowing that to be the definition or the defining factor of who we are, those of us listening, those of us in this room, may we take encouragement that we can fully rest in that.
Mhm.
That's not a momentary thing at some prayer time at camp, and it's not a momentary thing on our deathbed whenever we see Jesus face to face. It is the beginning and the end, just like what you said. It is everything in between,
Yeah.
and it is who we are now, and we can take solace in that. We don't have to worry about what to think about all these different things in the world, because we see the truth and the grace and the wisdom of Jesus that we can lean upon. We don't have to try to make up answers and make our own reputation look really great. You know why? Because who cares what the world thinks? God has shown us grace and love, and
Mhm.
he says that we are loved and that we are cherished, and that in Jesus we are holy and we
Yeah.
are righteous. And so who cares about the reputation of the world? Why are we working so hard to get those titles when we're sons and daughters of God?
Yeah.
So let's have a heart shift, have a
Yeah.
mind shift, and see the truth and see the reality of who we are in Jesus, and just take a breath.
Yeah.
And rest in that. And then as we approach our brothers and sisters in Christ, let's encourage them to do the same. And as we see a world that is on fire, literally and figuratively,
Yes.
we can say, there's something so much better than this.
Yeah.
We can be a light of grace and truth to them. We can be a beacon of rest, as it were. We can show them how to put up the baseboards of the heart. Hey, Micah, you got a simpler hack for us today?
Oh,
I
man.
do. One of the things that is potentially the most annoying house situations that ever happens to me is when me or somebody else in my house drops something like a light bulb or a glass, and the glass just shatters everywhere.
Yes.
It's a nightmare because you just can't ever seem to get it all.
Mhm.
And also, if you're trying to sweep it, which is technically one of the best ways to get glass if you're trying to protect your floor, depending on what kind of floor you have. Sometimes if you're vacuuming, it drags the
Oh.
glass across the floor. FYI, not DIY.
Yeah.
FYI.
DIY, FY, FBI.
All those. So here's a simpler hack. If you're using a really soft bristled broom, which is a good way to get glass up, one of the hardest things is to actually get it in the dustpan because it gets stuck in the front or it goes underneath it. A really simple way to get it all in is to tape your dustpan to the floor with blue painter's tape, where there's almost like a ramp coming into
nice.
the dustpan. You tape
Yeah.
it down and then you sweep in and then you pull the tape up and you're good to go.
Nice.
Easy peasy.
I like it.
That's
I'm
dope.
gonna go home and break a glass tonight to test that.
Just there was one time, I'll tell a breaking glass story real quick and then I'll close this out. There was one time that there was a car wreck on my street and they cleaned it up. The clean crew usually comes pretty quick if it's a bad wreck, and the clean crew did. They didn't tape anything to the asphalt to sweep up the
That
glass.
would've been
but
awesome.
that would have been great. I was listening to Simpler Pod, but they cleaned everything up, but they left like the casing for the rear blinker, so that orange casing, yeah, and it was like perfectly intact. So I don't know what kind of wreck it was, but it like hit it, and I guess like boop, and it just popped out. And I thought, I'm gonna use that as a lampshade. So what I did was I went into my room and I took off my lampshade and I put this thing on. And I screwed a light bulb through where this light bulb would normally screw in. I kind of had to break the plastic a little
Yeah.
bit. Then my whole room was orange. I was like, this is amazing. Then I got home and I left it on because I was like, I want to come home and just see what this is like to have it all orange. I was like 16. And I got home and the light bulb was out and I was like, oh no. And I went to go and screw it. And the second I applied pressure, like the glass exploded and went everywhere. And I started to clean it up. And whenever I grabbed the dustpan, I noticed there was a huge shard of glass just in this thumb. And you can kind of see the little line right there. But that entire thing was just that I jammed it in even further. And if I had only known to get the painter's tape, I feel like I would have noticed that a little bit further.
Firster.
I would have noticed that firster if I had gotten that there.
Wow, with that,
Yeah, with that. Guys, as always, keep Jesus as core. And I feel like we've said that a ton this episode, but that is the heart. That is the simpler heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Keep Jesus as core, and that applies throughout everything. And you know what? We'll talk to you guys next time. In 2 weeks, we're still doing 2 a month. So we'll
Heck
talk
yeah.
to you guys in 2 weeks. See ya.
See you later.
Bye.